you want to go ahead and say?
Test 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
Works.
You're good. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being with us, whether you're here in person or you're watching on our streaming channel today. I'm Andrea Springer, and we're here for the first Sunday in March for Story Sharing. It's our time to sit and listen to the stories of people not only from our parish, but within our community. And of course, we always say the shortest distance between two people is a story. I'm really honored that Dave Sotelo has offered to join us this morning. Dave and I had a conversation, and I just told him, I thought, I don't know if we're going to have enough time because your story is that interesting. But he's promised to be as concise as he can be. We want to remind you that our role today is to listen to what Dave has to say. If you have questions that you would like to hand to the table at the end of the session, so I can share them with Dave and he can answer them. There are cards around and pens, and if you don't have a card or a pen, just write it on what's available. None of us can be whole alone. We need each other to live fully, which I think is a really important part of this story sharing. So I'm going to introduce Dave Sotelo, and he is the Human Relations Coordinator? Officer for the City of Hutchinson. And if you haven't heard Dave's story before, it's pretty profound. And as we're going to think today, as you're listening to him, the word that he brought to us was belonging. So that's how we're going to be approaching today. So Dave, a lot of people may not know that you had a very interesting journey from Mexico to the United States to Hutchinson, Kansas. Tell us how you got from where you started to where you're sitting today.
Sure. Can you hear me if I'm this far away? Yeah. Okay, but the live stream might not, right? Okay. So
he says it's okay.
Oh, it's okay. Okay. All right. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for allowing me to come share story. In my work, I think that's the best thing we can do to connect and to love each other is to get closer and story plays a big role in that. I was born in Mexico in 1996 and grew up with my grandmother. Mom and dad were too young and not ready to be parents, and so grandma stepped in, and she also, as I got older, more grandkids came home to be taken care of by her. She was our caretaker from the moment we were born until the age of 13 for me. She also took care of my two cousins whose mother died when the youngest one was born. She died through childbirth. And then she also took care of my other cousin whose dad died when she was younger. So she was just, if I've had a hero, it's her. She is who I strive every day to make proud. It's something that's constantly in my mind. Just I want to make sure that I make her proud because she put a lot of work into us and sacrificed so much that she didn't have to, but she did. And if I've known unconditional love, it's because of her. So grew up with her, despite all the odds, had a pretty good childhood. We were loved. We had a loving home. We were taken care of. And around 2009, Mexico goes through a new precedent, and one of the main focus of the presidency of Felipe Calderon is his name, was to combat organized crime. And so in a way he militarizes the police and uses the military to go after drug cartels in the country. And not even, I think, 3-4 months later, the violence levels in the country are just rising, and that looks like killings on the streets. It looks like military driving through your neighborhoods looking for the bad guys. I lived in a town about the same size of Hutchinson. It was safe. It was, the place we called home. And my aunt was a police officer working in that town of Camargo. Um, so at the same time, once they start seeing, what happens is the military goes to the big cities to try to address organized crime in different parts of the country. And the drug cartel, big drug lords go and do their work elsewhere, outside of those main cities. And so our town was one of them. And so we see the increase of people that are not from there or that are earning more money because they're part of this organized crime. And it was really easy to see. One, I think, but still just kind of blows my mind is they're paying young kids, 16, 18-year-olds, $50 to work on their hit list, right? They're just ruthless. And so the local law enforcement tries to address this thing, and my aunt, who's part of the police department, they're going after them, and they say, if you don't stop what you're doing, we're gonna kill you. And they didn't, and the death threats got so bad that at some point our lives were at risk too. They were going after her family. I'm walking from school. I get dropped off at a corner near my house, and I'm walking to my house, and I see the guy who had threatened our family just down the street, and he's talking on the phone about going after our family. And so I find a different route home, and I get home, and we locked all the doors, and we got on our knees and we started praying and crying. And I was 12 years old at the time, and I remember just thinking, it seems silly to pray right now. it seems silly to just get on our knees and cry. And so I got up and I went and grabbed the phone and I called the emergency number. And I'm describing what's happening, and they're aware of the situation, and they said, well, the same thing that happened to your aunt, we just don't want that to continue to happen to more of our law enforcement officers. And so there's really nothing we can do. What we'll do, though, is we'll drive you out of town. And so they escort us out of town. We leave to a different city, and we get reunited with my aunt who had left earlier. At that point, we just didn't feel safe in the country anymore. And a local law enforcement agency was not going to address a multi-nation drug cartel. And at that point, my grandmother is thinking, how do I keep these children safe? How do I just, this is a lot for them. And it was. As perfect as their childhood had been, to go through that was just so different than anything I had experienced. And they decide, my grandmother, my aunt, my parents, my uncle, my parents and my uncle live in the States, and at that time undocumented. The best thing to do is to maybe just come across the border and live over here. And so we try to see what the legal alternatives are to coming here, and zero options for us to come here legally. My grandmother could, but the rest of us could not because we had parents over here that were undocumented. And so the plan of action is that we're going to cross the border undocumented. We're going to pay $1,000 for each of us to get somebody to help us cross the border. And it wasn't crossing the border like walking through the desert, crossing a river, which was my expectation when I heard that's what you're going to do. The way it worked for me is we went to Juarez, at that time one of the most dangerous cities in the world, and we were using IDs of actual people, whether those IDs have been stolen or you could loan them your ID and make some money out of it. So there's a business opportunity. Not sure how many folks would look like you, but most of those folks were Hispanic. At least they appear to be. And so, and literally, so my whole family starts crossing the border, and I'm the last one on the other side with strangers who are criminals.
And have been paid to take you across.
Right. And they also get paid for other crimes that they commit, right? So that's not the only one they're in the business of. And I just felt the most unsafe I've ever felt in my life those 2 days once I was the last one on the other side of the border. And the whole process of finding an ID for me was no science. I walked into a room, a hut, on a table just as big as that one, and there was IDs all over it. And the guy looked down, he looked at 12-year-old Dave and looked down again, found one, he said, memorize this information, that's who you're going to be tomorrow. And I was 12 years old. And I was a pretty good kid. I was an altar server at church. I made church a crucial part of my life. I did well in school. Grandma always taught us to be nice, to not lie. And all of a sudden, I'm supposed to memorize this fake information of a kid that, by the way, is 21 years old. Had a developing mustache, which I already had a good one at that time, but not quite as good as a 21-year-old. He was a U.S. citizen, and so I memorized the information, I tried to cross the border twice in two different IDs, similar experience both times. The first one, I'm actually crossing with my aunt's boyfriend, so he's still on the other side, and I nailed it. I nailed it. I memorized the information. They ask you a few questions, but he did not, and so we get sent back to Mexico that
Because
same
of
night
him.
because of him. So I'd like to point that out. It wasn't me. I did great. And so we get sent back middle of the night to Mexico because he didn't he got nervous, duh, and so they say, okay, we'll try again tomorrow. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just can't try again tomorrow. And it was, I remember when I get sent back, we go to this stranger's home, this professional, sorry, and it's December 11th, going into midnight. And in Mexico, if you're familiar with the Catholic tradition of Mexico, it's a big day, December 12th, the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. I never really understood Mary. It was a kind of weird thing for me. Like, what? The Mother of God, Jesus? I don't get it. It's so confusing. Sure, you're immaculate. I don't even know what that word means. And that night, if you turn the TV on from like 5 p.m. on, it's the Basilica in Mexico City and different communities across town celebrating, honoring Our Lady of Guadalupe. And the TV's on, and I'm on a couch, took a shower, got new clothes on, and I am crying because I just feel so powerless. And I want to go back home. I want to go and be sleeping on my own bed, hope that I'll get to go to school the next day with my friends. I want to hug my grandmother. I want to be with my family.
Who have already all gone.
Gone across the border.
Across.
And I just, I remember my prayer being, Mary, I'm not sure about you. I'm not sure who you are, not sure what you do, but if you can help me out, please. Because I know that I can, and I remember thinking this, I know that I can't go back. And I really don't want to go to the United States. That was a whole thing that had been playing through my life. My parents always wanted me to come here. I was fine where I was. There was no need for me to go to them. Did not want to experience whatever this was that you all did here.
Because you were safe, were you?
Yeah, I was happy. There was no need for me to get up one day. I always tell folks, most of the time, at least in my experience, Mexican immigrants don't get up one day and say, I want to go shopping at JCPenney. Let me make a trip to the U.S. and cross the desert and swim across the river or go find one out of 200 IDs on a table, right? Yeah. That's not what happens. And that was not my experience at all. And so we try again the next day, different ID. And this time, he's 21 years old, so he's an adult. I have no people with me. I'm crossing. There's somebody that's helping me, and they're crossing at the same time. And it's like you're going to the bank. There's lines, and you get up to because we're walking, and you get up to the border agent, and they check your ID, and they ask you a few questions, and you're usually telling them, because you're walking, I'm just going across to go shopping. That's the thing that you do. And that's, in border communities, that happens a lot. And a lot of folks would work in the Mexico side and go back to the States or the other way around. And so I'm crossing by myself, and this time I'm using the U.S. citizen ID, so I should speak English, but I don't. But we practice a few questions. There's 4 or 3 questions that they're going to ask me. Where are you going? What are you doing there? And I knew enough English where I could fake it to make it, but not enough beyond 4 questions that I had practiced. And so they asked me the first question, and I got it. Second question, I got it. Third question, I got it. They got to a fifth question, and I was just like, that amount of questions, I just don't have more answers for you. And so busted, right? Like they just take me in, and I'm again really, really scared because this time I just don't have anyone with me. And again, I'm 12 years old. And, I'm sitting in the little detention center by the border for about, I think it was about 4 or 5 hours. And finally, they tell me, we're going to send you to a shelter. And
Now, this is a shelter on the Mexico
the
side?
U.S.
On
side.
the
So
US
now
side. You're over the border.
I'm a minor,
Uh-huh.
unaccompanied minor, right? We've heard that term. And your life clearly is in danger. You can't go back. Let's figure out what we can do with you here.
Okay.
If you look at the numbers around 2009, that's the first year we see a spike in unaccompanied minors. And then during the Obama years later on, and then during the Trump years, there were kids sleeping in empty Walmarts, right? And kids in cages, we called it. So it's one of those shelters. It wasn't so severe then, but there were kids from across Central America there for the same reason that I had gone through. Eventually, my aunt and uncle who live here in Hutchinson, they entered the process of taking me into their home as legal guardians. I can't go live with my parents because at the time they're undocumented. I can't go back home to my grandmother, who eventually goes back to Mexico because my life is in danger there. And so the solution is to stay in the country, and if I can be with documented folks, my aunt and uncle who I had not met before, they said, we'll take him in. And so that's how I end up eventually in Hutchinson, Kansas.
Wow.
To, it was funny because I remember my prayer was, I want stability. I know I can go back, and I don't want to go to the U.S. But at this point, I'll just take safety. I'll just take something that I know where my life is going to go to the next day. And so then I get sent to just a brand new family in a tiny little town, I thought, just as white as can be. Man, I just...
Doesn't feel safe.
No, it didn't. It didn't. And they did a great job of making me feel safe. But yeah, that's sort of how I got here.
What was the amount of time between being in the shelter and making it here to Hutch?
Yeah, so I entered the shelter December 13th, and then I get to Hutchinson around January 20th. So at that time, the shelter experience on its own is just like a whole new world of spending. I remember just thinking, it's almost Christmas. It's almost Christmas. And I just, and for a week, I don't know how to contact my family. I don't have phone numbers with me. I knew where to go once across the border.
Mm-hmm.
There was a telephone pole that I had to strive to get to. And that was the only plan we had. And so at that time, my grandmother, once they know that I've been detained, she's going between the Mexican consulate in El Paso and the U.S. consulate in Juarez, back and forth, day after day, trying to figure out where I am. And about a week in, she finally it gets processed. They get my information in the Mexican consulate, or in the U.S. consulate in El Paso, the other way around. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And she calls the shelter. They say, do you want to talk to him? And she's like, of course. And so every day I'm just, praying for them, and that they somehow I was worried about what my grandmother was going through, trying to find me, and she called, and we talked for the first time, and I can not talk about that moment without getting emotional.
I'm getting emotional. Yeah, yeah.
It was, yeah, I felt safe. I hadn't felt safe throughout this entire time, and somehow that phone call just felt like I had something to look forward to, which was seeing her again.
One of the things when you and I talked and we were going kind of over the questions, I asked what it was that kept you connected on your journey in this country, and you talked about church.
Yeah,
Church was always that place.
yeah, yeah. Everything was different, right? So I get to a new home, a new language, a new set of friends that are not friends that I don't trust yet, new school, new everything. And my wife and I always talk about the liturgy because she didn't grow up in structured liturgy like I did. And the beauty of my Catholic faith is that I get to walk to most Catholic churches, and the formula is constant, right? And some might lean more high churchy than others, but I know that after the gospel comes the homily, after the homily comes the collect, after that it comes the consecration of and so I know that, right? And that familiarity was so comforting, and and it was in Spanish, and the music was in Spanish, and I looked around the church, and there were brown people painted in the murals of the church, and the guy that was a priest was a white guy, Father Blick. Loved Father Blick. And he made such a big effort in telling stories that he knew would connect with us. And tried so deeply to understand where we came from and to love us and accept us and celebrate who we were in that church. I couldn't get any more of it, right? I wanted to go to church all the time those first year, because I just felt like, okay, that is my go-to to feel home, to feel connected, to feel centered.
And you didn't grow up in a necessarily religious home. You found the church, which was like down the block.
Right. So I grew up down the block from the church, and like a good Mexican grandmother, my grandma only took us to church on Easter and Christmas. And Our Lady of Guadalupe, sorry. Yeah, and so we didn't go to church. We didn't go to get our first communion classes, any of that. So she ran a little grocery store out of her home, and I helped since I was a little kid. If that's where I get my social skills, because I was forced as a little kid to talk to people while she washed our laundry or cooked. I had to run the store from the first grade on. And I would see every Sunday because that's when she did laundry. So I'd see around 8:30 people would start walking to the church and the bells would ring. And at some point I said, Grandma, what's going on? Why do people do that? And she said, well, that's what we're supposed to do. And I said, okay. So why don't we do it? And she's like, faith is nice and all, but going to church every Sunday, we don't have to do that. And I said, well, I want to. And she said, okay. And so I'd walk to church. I think it was in the first or second grade when I started to walk to church by myself every Sunday. Eventually, I wanted to do my first communion. I was in the fourth grade. And so the way they do First Communion in Mexico, the parents go to take classes, and you go to like religious education, Sunday school, what we call here, but the parents go take classes and then they go teach it at home, the content that you're supposed to learn, which was a beautiful experience. My grandma rolled her eyes when I told her I wanted to do that because she knew what the commitment that came with it. And till this day, she goes to church and she practices her faith more deeply after she went through that. And, I just thought that was, the cliche of God uses us in one way or another, and it really worked. Just how he used us, right, in that moment to find him through one another.
And you explored a vocation in the priesthood at some point, right?
Yeah, I went to, clearly not a priest. I went to Conception Seminary right after high school, which is a Benedictine monastery in Northwest Missouri that runs a diocesan seminary. And then I went to University of Dallas. There's another seminary there. So I was in it for 2 years. And I was really, since I was a kid, I would see the priest celebrating the mass, and I would always just say, I want to do that. First of all, the guy gets 20 minutes of stand-up, right, every Sunday, and he's killing it. And they're like, this is the best audience you could get. And so it's like, I want in that gig. And so I've always had this attraction to the priesthood, the beauty of the liturgy, of the sacrifice that Catholic priests make to be priest. And so it's always there, and my grandmother always shuts it down. She's like, no, that's not what you're meant to be doing. And I get here, and my parents also just kind of just not interested in that idea. And finally, I'm like, I'm going to try it. I don't care what you think. I'm going to try it. And I go, and I tried it, and I really was in love with the idea of becoming a priest. That's all I could think about for 3 years, quietly in the back. That's what I want to do. And yeah, I get there, and constantly there's this tug in my heart of, I'm glad you're here to discern, and just do that. And eventually that discernment leads me to, this is not what you're meant to do, right? That's a whole poor, and I remember the bishop saying, when they do a last appointment with the bishop where he accepts you into the seminary, it's a formality, and he said, if one day you get ordained, I get to lay my hands on you and ordain you, praise God. And if one day one of the priests in our diocese gets to be with you at the altar waiting for your bride, praise God. And if one day you decide that marriage is not what you're seeking, praise God, right? And so it really gave me freedom to try to think about that. But yeah, in my prayer, I remember thinking in that discernment saying, listen, God, I think I would be a pretty good priest. And you need Hispanic priests. I really want to do this thing. It felt like breaking up with your girlfriend. They had been dating for a few years now. They were pretty serious about. It was hard. It was a heartbreak, just learning that I was not meant to keep on that path.
I'm going to ask, I've got time for about one more question before we open up for questions, but I want to ask you, how has this faith journey impacted what you do with the Human Relations Commission for the city? And do you feel like you were given a different, you weren't called to the Catholic priesthood, but is your mission in the work you do now?
Yeah. And I'm, it's a city government official, I have to say. I'm speaking about myself, right?
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
And
yes. You are speaking on your own behalf.
Yes.
You should have clarified that in the beginning.
Yeah, and but I talk about belonging all the time, And belonging means you get to show up as who you are. And and true belonging doesn't ask you to fit in, to change things about you. It believes that your whole self is so important that you get to bring it wherever you go. And my whole self means that I'm Catholic, that there's a faith in me that lives and shows up. And the discernment part is huge, right? Learning how to discern possible actions that I get to take, but also just the beauty of getting to believe that people have worth and dignity beyond what their work might be, beyond what they do for a living, and that they should be valued and respected and welcomed and loved wherever they show up. That shows up for me all the time. And there is a wealth of Catholic theology and Catholic social justice teaching that talks about inequity, that talks about inclusion. I was just reading Pope Francis's Joy of the Gospel, which was one of his first encyclicals, church documents, and he talks about exclusion, and he spends so much time talking about economic systems that have created exclusion. He talks about our own individualism that have created inclusion. He talks about the systems that are in place that, and so that's showing up for me all the time. And at the same time, I I didn't lose everything, but everything was taken away from me, right? That's what it felt like. And all the sense of belonging that I had was gone in a matter of days. And so I really had to, belonging is being willing to stand alone and truly feel connected to yourself and not having to change who you are. It's that braveness to show up as you are. And that some people might not love that. Some people might not invite you in. And you still get to be you. Doesn't matter. Because there's something deeper that's connecting you and I. And I know in here my worth doesn't come from your acceptance or your love. And so when everything, just all that sense of connection goes away, and I come here, I have to find something to feel like I belong. And first of all, I belong to myself, right? And to the divine. Um, and so that's, I also talk a lot about inclusion. Inclusion is what we do to make sure people get to belong. But belonging is about us, really. It's about, being connected to self and then being connected to others. And so, yeah, I don't exclude that part of me when and we shouldn't. When we get to show up places, right? We shouldn't. And there's risks with that. But navigating and staying curious about those risks is huge.
All right, I bet there are a million questions out there for Dave. If you've got some written down, I see one here. I hope that's a question.
Looks like
It is? Okay, got it. Anybody else? Up, one there, one there. Thank you, thank you. It says D, is it DE or DI, or DF?
DEIB.
DEIB, what does the B add and why is it important?
Yeah. So again, I, those are words that we're hearing all the time in the work of the human relations, right? What we call the 60s. So the B is the belonging part.
Okay, so what's D stand for?
Diversity, equity, inclusion, and then belonging is
Okay.
that B. Diversity, I always talk about, it's just is, right?
Right.
And so that's where people want to start usually. We need more diversity. And I always say, no, you don't yet. Because what happens when diversity shows up? And how do you, what structures, first of all, what structures have kept diversity from showing up? And we mean that, like, the usual thing is like, well, we are diverse. We have doctors and lawyers and engineers, and some people make $20,000 a year and some people make $100,000 a year. And yeah, that is diversity. But we were also talking about diversity in gender identity, and we're talking about race, and we're talking about ability, physical abilities and disabilities. There's a whole array of groups that have systemically been excluded, and so that's the deep D. The E is equity, right? So the systems that the absence of removable barriers. And then what's that?
Right.
Inclusion, right? What we do as a community to make sure that people get to belong.
Okay. The next part of that question is, how do we do belonging? And where do we start? And as a church, do you have thoughts on how we do belonging?
Yeah, so we do belonging a lot of the times that starts with on an individual level, right? It's learning about who I am. It's learning to not fit in. It's learning to love yourself and feel connected to yourself, despite the risks that might come with that, right? So that's all internal. But we can create cultures of belonging by being inclusive, right? And by embracing a belonging culture that you get to show up as you are.
Okay. Let's see. What are the top needs you see for the human relations in Hutchinson?
As we look at population declines across the state, and we look at the communities that have grown, that looks like diverse communities as far as race and ethnicity, right? And in Hutchinson, the communities that are growing are the minority communities, not at the fast rate that other communities are, like Garden City Liberal. And so I'm thinking about how do we, if that's the future, how do we create systems that are structured in a way that allows folks to thrive regardless of who they are. So that's one. I also I'm worried about everything, but one thing that I lose sleep at night is because I do think that as a society we are learning identity, and defining who gets to be an American, defining who gets to belong here, who gets to be someone from Hutchinson, right? Kansan. And what that assumption was for the long time does not look like that identity anymore. So that changing identity is exciting, But if we don't get space to talk about that change, because at some point, if more people get to fit in, then those identities get different, right? And there's a beauty to that. And some folks might feel like, well, this is no longer feel like the place that I remembered. And that can cause pain. And if pain is not addressed, it can cause hate. And so I would say just having space to talk about that change and that pain and creating opportunities to belong, to remind each other that we belong to each other as a community. I'm worried what will happen if we don't create spaces for that. And, you know, it's hard to advocate for the white male in a way, right? But I do think thinking about folks who are struggling with that is huge, and it's important. And certainly I'm not spending any human relations programming money on that. But I'm thinking about that, and I'm always open for folks to come talk to me about those experiences.
Yeah.
But I'm really worried about that, because when we don't take care of that in the right way, when people start feeling excluded from the communities that they forever felt like and then you add a cocktail of white supremacy and nationalism and fear that is profitable, you get January 6th. And that's really scary.
And it's 10 o'clock. I tell you what, if you have further questions for Dave, if he'll stick around a little bit, come up and speak with him. We want to say thank you.
Thank you
for
so
coming.
much.
What a gift this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Father Ted, will this be on the Facebook or the YouTube?
Facebook.
Okay, thank you so much.